We haven't got the entire committee here, but since we were delayed by votes and our witnesses have been patiently waiting, I think we will start. We do have quorum. Madame Smart, thank you very much for being here. I know we had attempted on 2 or 3 other occasions to fit schedules and we weren't successful, so we do appreciate your appearance today. I think you understand how the committee's function works. We'll have an opening statement from you, followed by a series of questions by committee members. So without further ado, Madame Smart, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for inviting me here today as part of the committee's important legislative review of the Public Servants Disclosure Protection Act. As you may know, this Act is an important part of the Government of Canada's integrity framework, and we take it quite seriously. Feel that integrity is the cornerstone of good governance and democracy. By upholding the highest ethical standards, public servants safeguard and enhance public confidence in the honesty, fairness, and impartiality of the federal public sector. To this end, the Act sets out the measures to promote an ethical climate. It establishes the foundation to promote a culture of right-doing and a positive ethical climate through measures such as the creation of the Values and Ethics Code for the public sector, which applies to some Crown corporations, separate agencies, and the core public administration. The code, along with the organizational codes of conduct, describe for public servants at all levels the values and ethical practices that guide direction, decision-making, and behavior across the public sector. La loi encourage aussi les employés.
The Act also encourages employees in the public sector to come forward if they have reason to believe that serious wrongdoing has taken place. And it provides protection for employees against reprisal when they do so. In so doing, the Act addresses issues that are both complicated and highly sensitive in nature, with the result that the legislation itself is complex. That said, I would welcome any proposals your committee might make to simplify this legislation.
I know your committee has heard testimony from a very diverse group of witnesses, and I think you should be commended for considering such a wide variety of perspectives. I think the challenge before your committee as it weighs the evidence is a very important one, and I'm very much looking forward to your committee's recommendations for improving the legislation and how it functions. Certainly, and I recognize that there are areas where the Act could be improved. It's been in place now for almost exactly 10 years, and it is to be expected that during this time, issues in its administration, the mechanics of its procedures, or in the scope of what the legislation covers would become evident, and I think you've found a few. For example, it has become apparent that it is important to protect not just the discloser, but others who may be associated with the case, even if that association is mistaken. Monsieur le Président, je reconnais aussi que la loi devrait faire.
Mr. Chair, I also agree that the legislation should make it as easy as possible for someone to come forward and to be protected when they do. Options might include simpler and more direct access to the Public Servants Disclosure Protection Tribunal, or the implementation of a reverse onus for the employer to prove that no reprisal has taken place.
The importance of having different disclosure channels available. Several technical recommendations have also been brought forward by the stakeholders you've heard from to address some of the specific areas of the Act as it now stands. Another issue to be considered is whether there is sufficient direction in the legislation around the investigation process for internal disclosures and perhaps how these investigations might be appropriately related to the disciplinary investigations of individual wrongdoers. This legislative review also represents an opportunity for clarification, I think, of the interplay between this Act and other legislation such as the Privacy Act and the Access to Information Act. I think it would also be useful for the committee to consider these matters with a view to balancing the protection of the disclosure with the rights of the accused. I've also followed with interest the testimony of witnesses from several international jurisdictions. Each jurisdiction's regime has its strengths and weaknesses. I would certainly welcome your advice on how to apply the many lessons learned in these other jurisdictions to find solutions that will work in the Canadian context. Par exemple, l'un des domaines où, à mon avis, il
For example, one area where I believe further effort is required is that of raising awareness of the Act and of the system currently in place. This includes an understanding of the roles and responsibilities of employees, supervisors, and deputy heads, and of the resources available to employees should they wish to disclose a wrongdoing.
Integrity Commissioner and the organization's designated senior officer for disclosure. Mr. Chair, the Government of Canada is committed to promoting a positive and respectful public sector culture that is grounded in values and ethics. And as I said in my introduction, I believe that a well-functioning disclosure regime plays a very vital role in such a culture. For my part, I very much look forward to your recommendations for ways to improve this important piece of legislation, and I will take it very seriously. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Madame Smart, we'll start with our 7-minute round, and I will remind all committee members that these proceedings are televised. Monsieur Ayoub, 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank both of our witnesses for coming here today. I'll start straight off then, since I have 7 minutes, with a question which may already have been answered. There are certain witnesses that suggested that the Commissioner for the Public Service Integrity be authorized to take collective measures when wrongdoing has been observed. But it does not replace other mechanisms that are involved in collective agreements or criminal procedures under the Criminal Code or settling of grievances or complaints for harassment. A possible alternative solution would be to make use of the information obtained in an investigation during the disciplinary proceedings under the Public Services, under the Labor Relations Act, when there is wrongdoing. My question is, what is the present system of disciplinary measures? What do you think of this proposal? I'd like to hear your views.
Are the responsibility, if there's a wrongdoing found, the disciplinary measures, I know that sometimes the Commissioner can make some suggestions for where to look for discipline, but it's up to the deputy head. The deputy heads are, like my level, are accountable in the public service for discipline and for managing the human resources within a department. The deputy heads, in those cases, where wrongdoing is found, they do immediately start looking at possible discipline. In some cases, they may hire a third party to look at what should be done. And that's one of the areas where, when I was reading your committee's testimony, oftentimes the deputy head has to start all over again with a separate investigation, and can't use the investigation that's been done by the Commissioner into wrongdoing. So, if that could be made available to the deputy head, it would for the investigation. I think that would certainly help facilitate proper discipline. So they have a wide range of mechanisms available to them. If the deputy head, for example, thinks that they could be in some kind of conflict, they can also ask another department or somebody to look into the discipline for them. So there's various mechanisms that exists, but it is the deputy head who does the disciplining when the report. Carl, is there anything to?
Yeah.
Avez-vous quelque chose à
Non, ça
ajouter,
va.
M. Trottier? Non.
The present system of disciplinary measures, can you tell me what particular types of measures exist? Can you give us some examples? Disciplinary measures can go, for example, to a reprimand. When we're talking about disciplinary measures, are we talking about the present system? It can be corrective measures. Of course, these are all recommendations. It can go as far as dismissal of the individual, but once again, it's a recommendation. As Ms. Smart said, the recommendation is good, but there does have to be a thorough investigation when the Deputy Minister does this. The fact that we're widening the amount of information, I imagine that this will accelerate the treatment and it will allow us to make recommendations more quickly without having to go through the entire process again. In another testimony, we also heard that the internal mechanism should probably be completely rehauled, started off from anew. I suppose that you probably found this rather radical. I'd like to know what you think of this particular position.
With great interest, actually, but I myself came down on this side that right now an employee has a lot of choice in terms of the channel that he or she picks for making wrongdoing. Some employees feel quite comfortable and would like to disclose wrongdoing within their own organization to a manager, or to the senior disclosure officer. Others don't, for whatever reason, choose to go to the public, to the commissioner, and I think that they should have, that range of choice. If they're not feeling comfortable within the department or the ministerial in the organization, I think that having the arm's length commissioner is a good thing. But if they are comfortable and would feel that they don't want to go to an outside source, so.
Si je peux ajouter, moi,
If I might add, when I heard this said by a witness, my view was that it is possible to have a significant change, because it would appear that there is not the same kind of trust among whistleblowers. There might be some people that are confident enough to provide this special information, but I think that there are other people who are a lot more reticent, and the certain specialists from other countries that have seen how things work elsewhere and who have judged the present system in Canada consider it to be quite inadequate. They think that we're going to have to start anew. It doesn't seem to have a solid enough foundation. I'd like to know whether you are open to reviewing this without not necessarily starting from zero, but we could probably have a more solid basis so that people who will be using the system will have a certain amount of trust.
Whatever the committee recommends, but I have found, as the Chief Human Resources Officer, I have the Values and Ethics Code. We work with the departments very, very closely. We make sure they have their own code of conduct. We make sure they have a senior disclosures person there. So I'm actually quite comfortable and confident that we have a pretty robust, it can always be improved, system in place. And I really like the fact that there's also an arm's length commissioner as an option for employees. So I'm all about giving people the choice.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bacali, 7 minutes, please.
Great, welcome. Thanks for being with us today. I'm going to start off Section 4. I'm wondering what Treasury Board has done to fulfill the duties required under Section 4, initiative activities.
Of the Act. We, as the Chief of Human Resources Officer, I actually have the code. So that I'm responsible for all the people management, human resource
Right.
code. So I have
So
the
the
values.
reason I'm
matrix
asking,
code.
we've heard a lot of testimony, we've looked at
Right.
surveys throughout the public service. The faith in the Whistleblower Act is very, very low. There's also a large amount, I don't call it ignorance, but there's a
Right.
strong lack of understanding or knowledge of the code, of their protection. It's required by the Treasury Board under Section 4. It's
Right.
very clear. I'm asking you, what has Treasury Board, your department, done to address this, disseminate this information? As is
I'll
your
tell you
responsibility.
I'll tell you what we do, and then can it be improved? Of course. But what we do is, we have an annual report that we collect from all of the departments. Have to put in a report to us every year. I have the code. I make sure that every department not only has the right sort of structure in place, as I was saying earlier, with the senior disclosure officer, but they also have to have their own code. So like each department, each organization's different. So by providing them
But
guidance,
Yeah, I'm just going to interrupt. It says,
Okay.
Treasury Board must promote ethical practices in public sector and positive environment, disseminating knowledge of this act and information. It sounds like it's just getting offloaded onto CEOs and then it's not going any further.
No,
Have you seen the surveys from
we actually do the surveys, where we
Okay.
administer the surveys.
You've seen
the triennial.
rather alarming results?
Which one are you referring to?
Well, I've looked at quite a few that show more than 50% don't have faith in the program, and
Right.
there's a lot of, again, lack of understanding or lack of knowledge of what their protection are. I'm just curious, are we not getting the information out enough? Are we, as Treasury Board, not doing its work as required under Section 4?
And I'll explain, what we do. So, when the departments put up their own code, you don't just put it up. There's engagement processes that you do with
How
employees.
do we follow up to make sure that's actually getting done or it's proper
We have
code?
We do. We check in. We have monthly meetings with them. There's best practices shared. So in many cases, if somebody's doing an integrity week as a theme, we suggest it to other departments. There's some. You actually heard from some of the best practices, Health Canada and the Public Health Agency with the ombudsperson. So
Considering their record, I'm not sure if I would use them as a best practice.
But
Let me
I'm just
interrupt
saying
you.
for
Let me
them
interrupt.
it
I just want to
works.
bounce over to Section 10 because I don't have a lot of time. Section 10 requires the CEOs, and you've mentioned, to establish procedures, manage
Right.
disclosures. Has this been done? And, what kind of guidance and direction are they getting? Because it's one thing to say they each have to have their own code,
Right.
but the system has failed our public servants, it's failed our taxpayers, it's failed people dealing with the government quite massively, and it's wonderful that we're doing this, and we've got very nonpartisan agreement that we've got to fix this issue. But, what's Treasury Board doing?
All I can tell you is that, we make every effort to make sure that the codes are talked about, people are aware of them. Deputies.
Do we have tracking?
We have
besides saying make sure?
tracking. We track it used to be an every 3-year survey. So 3 years ago, we found some
Or
alarming.
do you have tracking or follow-up to make sure their
We've now gone
responsibilities of the CEOs?
We've now gone to an annual survey. So that tells you.
Yeah, and the
Yeah,
annual
that's
surveys
wonderful.
say that's not getting done. Like,
If
does your department track with the CEOs that this?
If
These
they
guidelines are
haven't done
followed.
it, we follow up. If they're not doing dissemination, awareness, making sure the support's available, because part of it is making sure that there's kind of a respectful, healthy workplace, right? That's at the heart of it. The deputies last week just all signed a pledge to make sure that they have a workplace that is respectful.
Yeah, let me just quick questions because
Yeah.
I'm almost out of time. Should we be teaching this in our School of Public Service? We understand it's a phenomenal.
We do.
Institute.
When you're first hired, you get a copy of the code. So what does it mean? It's mandatory that you take
Well,
the.
yes,
at the
mandatory they
Canada
receive
School.
it. How are we following up to make sure they're actually reading it, et cetera,
Well,
et cetera?
it's a mandatory 3-hour online course with a test at the end.
But I know, but you know what? The Phoenix training was mandatory
Yeah.
and it wasn't done. How are we tracking that this is getting done?
If someone
say it's
hasn't,
mandatory, but-
if someone hasn't taken it, that information is given to the department, yes, that it needs to be done.
You've talked about a culture of doing the right thing. Do you think we are doing the right thing? Do we think we have that culture?
I know it's not, there's not a cookie cutter approach to it, right? I mean, you're talking about awareness, education, and support. Like if you're going to raise awareness, like we're doing on mental health, getting rid of the stigma of talking about it and saying there's an issue, then you also have to have the support. So it's your employee assistance program.
We're hearing we haven't got that culture yet, and we're
Right.
working toward a scale
We
of
are
1 to
working.
10. Where do you think we are? 9 o'clock or 9? We're almost there.
You know what?
We're hearing it's at about 2.
I read the triennial, the 2014, so I know where the hot spots were. So the next annual survey is out in about 2 months, and I'm going to be delving into those results.
Where do you think we're on culture right now?
I think that there's continuous improvement.
I hope you do
As I say,
recognize there's a long way to
lots
go.
to be done.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Weaver, 7 minutes.
Well, to follow Mr. McCauley's example of asking you about specific provisions of the Act,
Right.
One of those provisions is that the legislation itself should be reviewed every 5 years. That clearly didn't happen, and so I'm just wondering how Treasury Board interprets that requirement.
I mean, I wasn't there after the 5 years. It just didn't happen. I'm pleased that it's happening now. But there is, I know, the 5-year requirement. So that's all I can tell you on that one.
Okay, but given that requirement, how does it come about that Treasury Board didn't conduct a review after
No
5
idea.
years?
No idea. I've been in the job for a year and a half, so
Any thoughts, Mr. Trottier?
I don't.
Okay, I guess I'd also like to ask about the definition of wrongdoing.
Right.
We've discussed a fair bit the code of conduct. I'm wondering why wrongdoing isn't defined to include Treasury Board policies in general.
You mean, just to make sure I understand, putting it in a lot of the policies?
Well, it seems that Treasury Board policies are one of the main types of governance over the public service.
right.
So it seems logical that wrongdoing might be defined to include violations of those policies.
We have various codes, the values and ethics. I have harassment, prevention of harassment. So it's sprinkled throughout and defined in various ways in a number of the policies. I can pull them and send them to the committee if that would help you.
Okay, but I don't think that wrongdoing under the Act is defined as broadly as we're discussing right now, and
No,
I guess
correct.
that's my question.
Correct. You're correct.
So do you think it should be redefined to cover all Treasury Board policies?
We have a lot of other mechanisms that oversee the policies and oversee the compliance to policies. So in my view, I don't think that there is a necessity to broaden it to include all policies. Those are being covered already through other compliance mechanisms.
Do you think the definition of wrongdoing is good the way it is now, or do you feel it is too narrow in some respects?
We believe that the definition is an appropriate definition as it is now, but we would welcome. I mean, this is about opening the books and taking a look at it.
Yeah.
We would welcome the committee's views on that.
Yeah, certainly many other witnesses have expressed the view that the definition of wrongdoing is too narrow, and that's one of the reasons so that very few whistleblowers have availed themselves of the formal process. I guess I also want to ask a little bit about Treasury Board's role in implementing and monitoring and evaluating the whistleblower protection processes in individual departments and agencies. Could you just tell us a little bit about what sort of reporting requirements are in place? I know Mr. McCauley touched on this
Right.
survey, but I think we're maybe looking for something more robust than that.
Yeah, there is a requirement for annual reports. So the departments, the organizations must submit an annual report to me, and then I roll them up and I must submit it within kind of 6 months after the end of the fiscal year. So every fall, there is a requirement for the minister to table that report in Parliament.
So based on that reporting, could you give us a sense of which departments and agencies are the best or are the worst in terms of whistleblower protection?
I certainly have aggregate numbers in terms of how many complaints are made and disclosures and investigations.
I guess that's
are
not
done.
exactly what I'm asking. I think the committee has seen those numbers.
Yeah.
I guess I'm asking for more of an evaluation of how well the system is or isn't working in different departments. I mean, are there certain departments you would hold up as the gold standard of whistleblower protection, or are there certain departments where it's been a particular problem,
Right.
where there are particular weaknesses in the system?
Perhaps I can help. Are you looking for a subjective opinion from Madame Smart?
Well, doesn't have to be subjective. I guess. I'm assuming.
I'm not sure if there's any empirical evidence outside of the numbers that she's already provided.
Right.
But if you're asking for an opinion, I think that's a legitimate question. I just want to make sure that Madame Smart understands.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I guess my sense is that, Treasury Board is making an evaluation of
Right.
how well the system is working beyond just reporting the number of complaints. And so I'm asking if you can share that type of evaluation with the committee, if that's the type of analysis
Well, I'll tell
Treasury
you what I
Board's doing.
do. I mean, what I insist on is that all organizations are reporting to me, and that when and if a report of wrongdoing against an organization is found, I make sure that report is made public and put on the government website. So I take it quite seriously. I can't kind of rate them, but
Okay.
there's no department that comes to mind in my time in the job that hasn't complied with the requirements. So.
Okay. And does Treasury Board audit the whistleblower protection systems of the armed forces, CSIS, and the RCMP?
Well, as you know, they fall outside the
Yes.
Act, but they must have a comparable system in place. So we expect that they're reporting and telling us what they're doing as well. So I follow up.
So they do report to Treasury Board in the same way as other departments, and you monitor and work with them?
Yes, they do. I've seen. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I certainly appreciate they're outside the PSIC system, and that's kind of why I'm asking about them
it's the
separately.
forces, CSIS, and the Canadian Security Establishment.
Okay. Now, one of the issues that's come up a bit at this committee is the importance of independent investigations, and certainly that's a worthy objective. But it seems to me an even more important goal might be to have independent decision making or independent adjudication after the investigation has been complete. And I'm wondering if you agree with that statement.
Under the under the Financial Administration Act, the deputy heads are responsible for the act, and I can't think of. Sorry, what was the second part of your question again?
I guess what I'm getting at here is that there might be a problem with the senior management of the department, ultimately being the arbiter of a system, that could involve,
Right.
whistleblowing against them or against other senior management.
Yeah, and there are. All deputy heads have the the authority and the responsibility to take the reports and take them seriously. If there is an apparent or perceived sort of conflict, and they're worried about that, they do have the option of either asking another department to carry it out, or asking the commissioner himself to carry it out. So
I think we'll have to, unfortunately, cut it off. I gave you a little extra time, Mr. Weir, for my interjection. Mr. Whalen, 7
Well, I
minutes, please.
misunderstood the question at first. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Smart and Mr. Trottier, for coming speak with us today about this important review of the Act, timely as it is. I have some questions that more relate to what we envision that the Act might be and the types of objects we should see for the Act. I'm not sure if it's something you guys are able to or prepared to respond to. But in terms of the right of expression. When I look at the preamble to the Act, it talks about balancing the duties of loyalty versus the duty to be able to have freedom of expression granted by the Charter. I'm just trying to reconcile what possible duty of loyalty could there be that needs to be protected when someone is trying to disclose wrongdoing. Maybe you can describe for us, for the committee, what type of duty of loyalty might be being violated here, why that needs to be a consideration in the Act.
In what context?
Oh, I can read it. So
Yeah.
it says, this is the fourth paragraph of the preamble to the Act. It says, public servants owe a duty of loyalty to their employers and enjoy the right to freedom of expression. And this Act strives to achieve an appropriate balance between these two
Right.
important principles.
Okay.
I'm just trying to see, where does this duty of loyalty even play in? Aren't they being loyal by disclosing wrongdoing? So I'm trying to find out why that's even in the preamble, and maybe get your views on whether or not that can come out.
Yeah, because you know, when you do sign your letter of offer, you've got the code. You sign the code. You take the training. And if you do come across wrongdoing, I think it is an employee's duty, if you like, to tell somebody. And if it's they're not comfortable internally, as I said, they have, you know, the external commissioner that they could disclose to as well. So I do think it's whether it's loyalty, or I don't know why they put it in the preamble, but I'm saying that you know, as a public servant who has signed the value of ethics and values, and takes it to heart and works in the federal public service, I would think that most people, if not all people, would say it's their duty to report wrongdoing if they see it.
Right, so there should be no conflict between the obligations and rights under this Act and the duty of loyalty to the employer, because they're meant to be synergistic,
Right.
aren't they?
Yeah, I'm not aware myself of what assumptions and what the discussion was that put that in. I'm just describing to you how I see it.
In terms of other objects of the Act, how important in the majority of cases is confidentiality to the disclosures? Shouldn't we be encouraging a more open system in which any disclosures of possible wrongdoing can be discussed in an open and frank way, or is it truly important to have confidentiality?
You'll get my views just based on my experience in the public service. I think confidentiality is absolutely imperative. If the reports come out and they start to name the wrongdoer.
Well, I was actually talking about reports that would name the disclosor. Why are you, it's a different question,
Right.
but maybe you can answer my first question first.
Why don't I finish, and then
Okay.
If they name the wrongdoer, I mean, the whole goal is to, if it's really serious, why shame them? Like, you want the person to rehabilitate, take whatever discipline is coming, and then hopefully learn lessons from it. Depending on the seriousness, it's always on a case-by-case basis, but I don't see any gain in disclosing names in that situation. I would respect the Privacy Act on that one.
Okay, so my question was actually about the need to protect the identity of the person who's bringing forward the claim. So maybe you can answer that, and then I'm going to probe a little bit
It's
into
the same thing.
why we're protecting the wrongdoers.
Well, if you knew who was putting forward the claim, again, it depends on the situation, but I might not, if I knew that my name was going to become public, I might be not dissuaded, or I might not want to make the disclosure. And I think what we're trying to do is to have a culture where employees feel that when they see wrongdoing, they should be able, and they have some evidence, and they really feel very strongly that they should be able to disclose and
Sure.
be
Well, I think it's
guaranteed
smart that
confidentiality.
as a citizen, and not
Sure.
even as an MP, but when I think there's wrongdoing and it
Right.
should be disclosed, and the perpetrators of the wrongdoing should be punished, and if we have a system in place that is actually preventing the wrongdoers from being appropriately punished because their identities are shielded, the investigations are shielded, it sounds like what our Act does is it protects the wrongdoers more than it protects the people trying to correct the wrongdoing. Do you see that as something that's been spoken about at length at our committee? Do you disagree with that statement?
I'll just take so I think what we're trying to say, what Anne-Marie's saying is that we have to keep sight of what the objective is here. First of all, is to prevent wrongdoing. We'll say that. How do we go about preventing wrongdoing? Well, we conduct investigations and we give discipline. So there has to be an awareness that discipline can come out of the exercise of this. But it's not the shaming that comes out of this. It is the discipline that needs to be offered. So,
Sorry, I'm going to stop you there, Mr. Trottier, because wrongdoing is defined in the Act as a contravention of an act of Parliament, misuse of public funds, gross mismanagement in the public sector, an act or omission that creates substantial and specific danger to life. And this isn't about prevention, really, when the wrongdoer is coming forward. It's about, or the whistleblower is coming forward. It's about actual, identified wrongdoing of an extremely serious nature. And to circle the wagons and protect, oh, well, we don't want to be too tough on the wrongdoer, boggles the mind of the normal Canadian who think that if this happened in the public sector, someone would go to the police and the police would investigate and there would be a public hearing. Right. And rightfully, the people would be named, and they should be shamed because they have specifically endangered the lives and the health of persons, or they've grossly mismanaged the public sector funds, or they've contravened an act of Parliament. These are criminal offenses. Why should public servants have more protections than the average Canadian with respect to this type of malfeasance?
Mr. Whalen has obviously asked a very interesting question. Unfortunately, because of the time constraints we have, we're going to have to see if you can get the answer in with one of the other questions. Mr. McCauley, you're up for 7. Did you want to see, or Mr. Clark?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais vous laisser répondre à cette question.
But I'll give you a chance to answer the question if you'd like.
Madam Smart, if you want to answer, I'll let you answer this question.
Okay, we entirely agree with the seriousness of the acts, but the issue is that discipline needs to be imposed, right? There needs to be a discipline. The corrective action is corrected through the discipline and not necessarily through the shaming. And the reason I say not through the shaming is because most of the situations are probably not as clear as the ones that you described. In some situations, some people can be wrongly accused and then shamed, and so it becomes very gray, and we have to be, the individual might still be there tomorrow and having to be rehabilitated, as the CHRO mentioned, and having to work in an environment. But you're looking at a situation that is at an extreme, and you're saying there's something terrible happened. We probably would be firing that individual if it was a situation that warranted. So there needs to be some way where individuals that are rehabilitated have to work in the environment again.
Oui, Madame Smart, vous parlez français?
Again, it's about protecting.
Ms. Smart, you speak French, yes. In the document that was sent in February, to explain to us what your vision was on the protection of whistleblowers. And the second last page, the first page of your conclusion, you say?
As it was intended. Mm-hmm. Donc là, quand même, nous, dans les 2 derniers mois, on a entendu.
In the past 2 months, we've heard from whistleblowers. We've heard the Commissioner for Integrity. We've heard various departments and agencies. And we also heard from experts from other parliaments, particularly at the beginning of the week. And in the majority, they seem to be of the view that the Act is not working very well, or the Act is not necessarily well drafted, and there are certain oversights. How do you explain this discrepancy then?
Read the testimony as well, but I guess from my perspective, where I sit, I think that we have quite a robust integrity regime. We have the code. I make sure that, through the code, that employees sign their letters of offer. They get the code. They have to go for training at the Canada School. All departments, all agencies, all organizations have to have senior disclosure officers. They have to do their own code. They have to do some awareness throughout the department. They submit annual reports to me. I roll them up. We put them in Parliament. When there is situations that arise, they have the choice of channels. They can disclose internally. They can go to the Commissioner. I think it's pretty solid. Do I worry about, I think Mr. McCauley pointed to the survey, some of the survey results from a few years ago where employees were worried about reprisal, was one of the areas. I take that seriously. I mean, I think that when you find that, you need to redouble your efforts to have a healthy, respectful workplace where people don't fear.
Mais quand même, je veux dire, parce que vous, essentiellement, vous dites là, que la
But basically what you're saying is that the act is
mon Dieu, est-ce que c'est un
is working as it was intended. I'm wondering whether this might be a Freudian slip, because one of the experts on the Monday said that in his view, this act was created to protect high-level bureaucrats and the minister. When you say that it does work as it was intended, they say that it's protecting wrongdoers in high places. It seems to me that your analysis is very different from that view expressed by certain experts.
All I can tell you is that from the Treasury Board, from where I sit as the Chief Human Resources Officer, I think that it can always be improved, but I wouldn't scrap it and start again. I mean, it would be something to, a process of continuous improvement. If there are departments or areas where...
You would scrap it and start again?
I said I would not.
Okay.
Would not.
Okay.
It would be, I mean, obviously if the committee recommends that, we'll look at it. But in my experience, it has been the fact that it exists, the fact that organizations have to go through these steps, employees go through steps, and the fact that people do come forward sort of speaks to the fact that it's good that it's there. Okay.
Stop there. Thank you very much. Monsieur Drouin, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for the witnesses for coming here today. I want to just go back to a few things that Mr. McCauley touched on, and it was about public service culture and how you've mentioned that you require public servants to read the Values and Ethics Code.
Correct.
What else and there's an online training that you have to do, and what else is done within the public service to ensure that there is that good working environment?
There are a number of things going on. It's not just a one time, one step. So in departments, as you mentioned, they go for training. They have to pass the training. It's mandatory training. In their departments, there's constant armchair learning sessions. Some of the groups get together on a monthly basis and talk about best practices, like what are departments doing. Mental health is one area where the government as a whole has been really focusing in the last year. And part of that was because the Public Service Employee Survey said that people were afraid to disclose. There was a real stigma about talking. They were afraid in the workplace. So there's been concentrated efforts by having deputy heads be the champion and going out there and making sure that those conversations are taking place. And it's not just at my level, it's with all levels within the department. So
anybody managing somebody, so all the way down to managers and directors and whatnot?
All the way down to frontline, people working on the front line, directors. It's called Break the Silence.
And how are you measuring that impact?
We're a few ways. Okay. The survey is one critical tool, and I do the one big survey, like right across the whole enterprise, as we call it, and we've gone to annual so that we can track these types of things when we find them. Like 2014, you found some problems. Deputy heads put in place action plans, but you don't know whether or not those action plans work unless you have like an annual tracking. And I also know that some departments are also doing their own check-ins with employees, whether through what they call pulse surveys. So there's many ways to do it, but it is all about ensuring that you have a healthy, respectful work culture.
I was hoping to get your opinion on this, and we've heard from this committee that yes, identity protection is important, but Ottawa is a small town, and once you declare a problem, it's fairly easy to identify who's working on what project in Ottawa
Right.
and at the federal government. So I find it hard for public servants to have his identity protected once he decides to either use the Public Disclosure Act and go that route. There was some mention about allowing staff priority to be given to public servants who disclose, and it warrants an investigation, to be giving staff priority so they can move to another organization if obviously there is space available. But is that something that you would champion, or?
Perfectly within the authority of a deputy head to do. It's like they were responsible for the human resources, the people management within their department, so they could do it. I mean, I took your question the other way. The fact that Ottawa is such a small town in many ways, and people know what you're working on, is all the more reason I think you make sure that identity is protected, and that you do things confidentially, and that there is the Privacy Act. So
Well, it's done. It's done. We say it's done. You know, of course, their identity is not going to be revealed, but it's pretty easy to, you know, just on procurement, you can identify who's working on what project. So if they're declaring something on a certain wrongdoing on a certain project, it's fairly easy to identify which team is working on that, and then, you know, employees talk. So
it is case by case. If that employee is finding that they're uncomfortable, they would probably go to their HR or the senior disclosure officer, who would talk to the deputy head. And the deputy head, as I say, has full authority to move, give a leave. Like there is a good toolbox there to use in those cases. So,
Mr. McCauley, 5 minutes, please.
We do have time. Sorry. Thanks very much. I just want to get to one of the suggestions that we've heard. Every department in the government has its own little army for the whistleblower protection. We seem to hear it's quite ineffective. One of the issues is people are afraid to go within their own department to whistleblow. One of the suggestions is make those people in those inside departments independent reporting separately to a chief investigator. What are your thoughts on that?
so you're not saying abolish them, just have them report other places.
Right,
to
because
the commission.
again, some of the questions or some of the worries we're hearing, it's been expressed here as well. The system is set up to protect the departments, protect the bureaucrats. We've heard that from witnesses. We've heard it from experts. We've heard it of, I've got another word for it, than the victims of this system, where you bring it up and it's circle the wagons and protect the bureaucracy, protect the system at all costs.
It'll sound bureaucratic to you, but it's true. It'll come into a clash between the deputy heads have responsibility for the people in the department. So having somebody sitting in the department but reporting elsewhere.
Right, and that's part of the issue. What do you think of the suggestion of having the protection for these employees, independent implants inside the department, so they can go to them and they're reporting to a independent investigator?
As I say, I think it would set up a clash between the authorities of deputy heads to manage people versus,
I think you just answered my question on how we should go.
There you go.
Because it sounds like our system is set up for the deputy ministers to protect, rather than protecting the staff.
It's the deputy ministers to manage. They're like they manage their departments.
I would suggest with whistleblowers, their responsibility is to protect the employees and the taxpayers. Let me just quickly move back to Section 10 again. Who's ensuring that the CEOs have fulfilled their requirements? And I'm trying to figure out what directions they're receiving from Treasury Board about whistleblower procedures and standards so that there's equal treatment for all of the public servants. And then also with the Code of Conduct, I know it says it must be consistent with the Code of Conduct set by the Treasury Board. Who's following up to make sure that this whole myriad of departments, that it is consistent, but also the first part, like, who's giving them direction to ensure that they are following this?
Well, we do.
Okay, in what way?
Treasury Board. Well,
Just give us some, give me some examples of what you're doing.
A couple of examples. When they said they have to report to us every year on their statistics, so there's no hiding. of this.
But
So
reporting statistics, like how are you ensuring that the public servants, department by department, are receiving equal treatment and equal protection? It seems that it's being shifted off to the CEOs have to develop their own plan, and it sounds like Treasury Board is just shifting
they
it
do.
off and not following up. Like who's
I
making
didn't want to
sure?
leave that impression. We give them, not direction, but we give them guidance on what should be included in a plan, so that
Who's following? Okay, who's following up to make sure they're doing it?
we do. Like if they
Like,
haven't.
do you do audits, or do you just wait for them to say, "Hey, here we're doing it"?
No, we follow up and we make sure that, I don't think we've done an audit per
Okay.
se. I do know that if a department is trying to hide something, and I'm not saying they are, but if something is really off track, that kind of information tends to come out through your annual surveys. You can
Do you
figure
think
out.
an annual survey is once a year is
True.
enough to follow up?
So we follow up, and if we're getting material, that's good. If we're not getting it, and the survey says there's a problem there, we'll follow up and ask what action plan is being put in place.
In light of everything we've seen and heard in the last couple months, do you think it's adequate what we're doing right now then?
In terms of whistleblowing,
In
Liz?
terms of following up to make sure our public servants are protected and people dealing with it are protected as intended under the Act? It sounds very much like, I'm going to pick on Health Canada. They were before
Right.
us, and, we've had 2 cases in, I think, 7 years or something, and it's like, is our system that bad, or are you guys perfect? And it's like, yeah, it was just kind of shrugged off as, who cares? And that's maybe a bit harsh, but it sounds like we have this, we've got this act, we've got requirements, but no follow-up.
Unfortunately, Mr.
And no
McCauley, we're going to have to
accountability.
leave that
Okay.
as a statement rather than an open-ended question, because we have 5 minutes left for Madame Ratanzi.
Oh, thank you very much for coming here. And I was quite interested in your opening statements that you said that the Act is an important part of the government's integrity framework, and integrity is the cornerstone of good governance and democracy. And from what you have described to all the questions that have been answered, from a process perspective, you have processes in place. But from the evidence that we have gathered from all the different people that have come before us, and there have been experts that have come before us, there have been whistleblowers that have come before us, the process is not as solid. So from a human resource, as a chief human resource officer, do you sign the contracts of all deputy ministers, or is it delegated somewhere?
I don't, the clerk does.
The clerk of the
Privy Council.
Do you approve of their jobs? How do they get selected to be deputy ministers or ADMs or whatever?
There's if they've come up through the system, there is a fairly rigorous system of performance management that is done on everyone, all executives, all employees in the public service. So for executives, just as an example, there's performance contracts, agreements in required from our policies.
So who does the audit of those performance agreements? And the question, and the way I'm leading up to it is, we have heard that the bureaucracy, and I'm looking at the whistleblowers, the bureaucratic culture protects the wrongdoer. And most of the time, the wrongdoer appears to be upper management. But at one point, I think you must have responded that you would like to protect the wrongdoer because of the false allegations. So how many false allegations have you received?
I don't.
Okay, so here is what we are, this is where we are in a tandem. We don't know who is right, who is wrong, but we're trying to listen to this act and saying, well, the act is a bad act, according to a lot of the witnesses, but we need to improve it and improve the processes in place. So I have a scenario that I'd like to share with you. So as a chief human resource officer, you are hiring a CEO of a organization, and the CEO does not have accounting designation, but he or she has to sign off those financial statements. Now, he or she does not know the complexity of the financial statements, so he goes 2 levels down to the financial officer, who probably is designated and who would lose his designation if he ever were to, in the private sector, sign something that was not worthy. So how does the financial officer protect himself if the CEO says sign or you lose your job? And how do they come to you? Because we're talking about billions of dollars, and if you do not understand the complexity of the financing of the government, and you're signing off, and you're relying on your 3rd level, where is that integrity, and where is good governance?
I'll just in terms of a factual correction, all deputies are appointed by the Prime Minister on the advice of the clerk. So they don't come through, they're not through the Chief Human Resources Officer.
Let's talk about CEOs. Let's talk about CEOs. You must
the deputy heads hire they are the CEO of the department. So they're also the kind of the accounting officer as well. And so they rely on, or they have a chief financial officer in just about all cases. And there's extensive, if any kind of money, and I'm not the money expert, I'm not the Controller General, but any kind of money, there's a due diligence process between central agencies and departments. And so anything that's being signed off has to be audited and attested to. I don't know if you have a specific case in mind.
I would just, because I'm thinking money, and I'm saying, well, who does it? And you say if the Controller General is reviewing all these things, then I'm fine. I'm coming to the, how many minutes do I have? 2?
20 seconds.
20 seconds, sorry. The whistleblowers that blow the whistle are ethical, but yet they get penalized. And I want your opinion on it, and if you can't give it to me, perhaps you can just send it to us.
Okay.
And colleagues, it looks like the bells are ringing.
What is it for?
I don't know.
The debate be now adjourned.
The motion is that the debate be now adjourned.
We need UC to continue to sit.
Yeah, we would need, and we're finished with our witnesses, but we've had another witness, Madame Therrien, patiently sitting here almost all day. We would need UC to have even
10 minutes?
10 or 15 minutes.
Agreed. Agreed.
We can suspend and...
Yeah, half an hour.
Or we could suspend and come right back here after the votes.
Can we give 10, 15 minutes?
Certainly, and then why don't we do that now if we can then, colleagues?
If it's not important to you, you can have our time.
As witnesses, Madame Smart, Mr. Trottier, you're excused. Thank you very much. We appreciate your attendance. If we could have the next witness approach the table, please, Madame Therrien. And we'll see if we can... Colleagues, we're in a bit of a unique situation, and Madame Therrien, welcome. A couple of quick housekeeping items first, and then I'll consult with Madame Therrien. Colleagues, Mr. Yazbek is here as counsel to Ms. Therrien to provide advice. That can only be accommodated with the permission of the committee. Is there any problems with that? Mr. Yazbek, welcome. Now, Madame Therrien, since we have votes, and we've got approximately 25 minutes until votes commence, leaves us perhaps at most 15 minutes here. We can certainly do one of two things. We can have your opening statement and perhaps one round of questioning, or not even a round, but one or two questions go for the votes and come back. My question to you is, would you be prepared to extend your stay with us this afternoon? It would probably take about 20 minutes to get us 2 votes and back, another 10 or 15 for the vote, so we're looking at extending your stay by about another half hour. Would that be?
That's okay with me, but I don't know if all these people want to stay. They don't have choice.
I think that this is a very good committee, and I think they're very interested in hearing your testimony.
Oh.
So why don't we do this, colleagues, perhaps so we don't have a disjointed set of questions. Perhaps we can have Madame Therrien's opening statement, then depart, and then return. Okay? Madame Therrien, I understand you've got a very short opening statement because you want to leave time for questions.
Yes.
But you can certainly expand upon that if you wish, because once we finish, and there's now 25 minutes. Now there's 25 minutes, so if you could give your opening statement, and then we'll determine whether or not we have a chance for at least 1 or 2 questions. But please.
Okay. But I'll have a short opening
Certainly.
statement. I want to thank you to the committee to give me the opportunity to speak to you.
Feel free to do so.
Ça va, je peux parler en anglais. J'ai tout préparé ça en anglais.
I've prepared everything in English, so I'll continue in English. I simply wanted to tell you something about my experience. As a whistleblower, it was an extremely difficult situation. There was talk about the various ways in which you could proceed when you want to make a disclosure. And I did deal with it, first of all, internally, following the appropriate hierarchy. It didn't work at all. They didn't find any problem. And there were even threats. I was told that if I made allegations that were unfounded allegations, then this wouldn't work out. We talked about internal mechanisms, a possibility of having an independent person that would conduct investigations. But within the organization, people protect each other. They're all colleagues and they protect each other. There was a cover-up. Supposedly there were no problems. In my workplace, there were different types of reprisals. I was ostracized, and people didn't want to talk to me. And people started questioning the way I did my work. Everything I did was wrong if I took 5 minutes for a break like everyone else. And then people were saying that I took 10 minutes. I was subject to extreme scrutiny. Everything was observed and questioned. When we talk about dealing with it internally and being anonymous, because people who, in fact, are responsible for wrongdoings, they are often the people with the power. They are people who are higher up. And people who are below them certainly are made to suffer. They're put through the ringer. So that was my experience. And then I raised the matter with the union. And they told me that the only way that I could do something was through a grievance. I think that you're aware of the fact that I did draw attention then to this quota system in employment insurance. So I don't have to go into the details of the matter. What happened then is that I was told that we can go through this with grievance. There's no other way of doing it. So I did decide to follow the grievance process. I did have Mr. Yazbek, fortunately, to provide assistance because it was a horrible situation. The 2 years of hearings and all sorts of things. The end result being that this had a great impact on me psychologically and so forth, because you hear all sorts of awful things. The employer does have lots of means at their disposal. They have lots of lawyers. They have a whole range of people who can find out all sorts of defects in the person, and they can destroy the reputation. And this is, in fact, what they do in the hearing with the adjudicator, the Labor Relations Board. It was a horrible thing. It took 2 years, and he said that a decision cannot be taken because it was not his jurisdiction. And I also went to PSIC at the outset when I went to them. Supposedly, it's there to protect whistleblowers. It was an extremely complicated process. I had to fill out all sorts of forms. It was very complex. And even at the outset, people didn't know exactly how to go about it. There was a sitting of 7 people then, the Commissioner of Integrity. And when I made a complaint, I was told, you didn't, you weren't within the time frame. It's a good thing that Mr. Yazbek was here. With his knowledge, then he resubmitted my application to the Integrity Commissioner, and they ended up accepting it, accepting my complaint. But they said the fact that I lost my job and the fact that I was suspended without remuneration and lost my security code, these in fact were not reprisals, because this was one of the important points that we were making. The fact that I was being thrown out was in fact reprisals on the government so that I would shut up. And to give my case as an example then, if ever people had the idea of doing something similar, so they wouldn't do something like that. So this is pretty much sums up what I had to say. I don't know whether I should say anything more. I'm in a sort of limbo at the present time. Neither here nor there. There's the arbitrator then who doesn't want to make a decision, because he claims that it doesn't come under his jurisdiction. And then there is the person, Mr. Friday, who says, who in fact has to wait until the other one decides. You wonder whether they agreed among themselves. So we're going to let her fall through the cracks, and nothing will be done. So one is waiting for the other one to make a decision, and finally nothing is happening. What I'm asking this committee then is that, yes, you should certainly review the Act. You should review the policies to provide proper protection to any whistleblowers, and so that the system is centered on the whistleblower rather than an attempt to protect people who already have power. Another thing is that's important, in my view, at the present time, if it were possible to tell Mr. Friday, you have no choice in the matter, you must send the files of Ms. Thériault to the office of the Commissioner. And if you were to give instructions of this sort, it seems to me that this would be very clearly understood. It would be clearly understood that the committee is serious about defending whistleblowers. It would be, I think, a gesture that would be very eloquent. It would show that we're not simply talking about this matter, but also doing something. And it is also very important for you to review the act. I'm not talking only for myself. Of course, it is my own case. I'm in debt. I'm no longer considered employable, and I don't have any money. The personal consequences were huge for me. It is for me. Yes, go ahead.
15 minutes.
Yes.
So we'll go to the votes, and we'll be back probably in about 30 or 35 minutes. If you could care to relax, and we'll be back with, I'm sure, many questions for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oui, je suis pas bébé.
We'll be back as soon as we can. To our witnesses for your patience. And colleagues, Mr. Yazbek has been classified now as a witness. He is available to answer questions should any of our committee members have them. I thank Madame Therrien for your opening statement. And colleagues, I think what we'll do, we'll start with a full 7-minute round of questions. If there are additional questions after that, we can continue. But let's see where 7 minutes each gets us. And Monsieur Drouin, we have you up first. 7 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et puis merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'd like to thank Madame Therrien for being here. I think that your testimony does cast light on the situation. I'd like to talk about your experience. We can speak in familiar terms then. When you found out about this decision of the quota, can you explain how you came to the decision to blow the whistle? Did you immediately sense a reaction on the part of the employer? The way I realized that there were quotas and so forth, it was towards the end of the year, towards the end of the fiscal year. We would be receiving what they called report cards every month saying, bravo, you were able to save such and such an amount, $370,000 employment insurance. This was from the executive in Edmonton, some high official who was in charge of this, and we would be getting these report cards at work. You saved so much money. But don't forget that you will still have to save some more money for employment insurance, another $500,000. In our performance report, or performance and learning assessment, this is something that was written, that was recorded then, in what their expectations were, that we were supposed to save $40,000 a month per investigator and $485,000 a year. It was clearly set out, and towards the end of the fiscal year, you're going to have to start saving a lot more money because it was the end of the fiscal year. Every week we'd be receiving emails telling us, don't forget, if there are any penalties or violations, This is going to be a way of saving money. Send this information as quickly as possible so we can enter this before the end of the fiscal year. It was a race to make savings rather than providing service to Canadians who expect to receive employment insurance and that they do fulfill the criteria. Rather than this being the emphasis, it was how much money could be saved. And when you made this decision, it seems to me that this wasn't the right way of proceeding. Did you bring this to the attention of your supervisor, or did you raise it internally? Yes, this is something that we discussed among colleagues, and I also discussed it with my team leader. And there were certain cases. Instead of saying good morning to me, the people would say,
The penalty to this guy, finally, Sylvie, and puis il n'y en avait pas de pénalité.
There wasn't any penalty. Rather than greeting me in the morning, this was the first question. This is something that the coach was trying to do. The team leader started talking. And explained to me, Sylvie, that this particular claimant that is asking for a benefit, you'll have to refuse it. Because he hasn't really been looking for work. The criteria for a job search, this we're talking about a claimant who was in a First Nation who lived in a far-flung village, someone who was working in fisheries. So there wasn't any work. It was seasonal. What ended up happening is that in talking about specific cases such as this, he realized that I didn't agree with this way of proceeding. Do you understand? This is how it started coming up in individual cases, dealing with them from day to day. I would say that this person is entitled to employment insurance, but he wasn't of the same view. I imagine that you, other colleagues, and I wonder what their reaction was this. I didn't really have so many friends there because my team leader, it was quite clear. And the manager was not a great fan of mine. And so people start making comparisons, and people are afraid of someone who might be a whistleblower. They are afraid of being associated with this person. There was one time, I can remember, I went to have a coffee with one of my colleagues, and the colleague said, I can't stand having unemployed being treated as criminals. And how long had you been in your position? For only a few months. Previously, I'd been working in another field. Yes, I'd been in programs. But this was as part of the Harper government, and the decision was made that they would cut back on certain programs. These were programs providing subsidies to community organizations and social organizations to provide assistance to people in need. They cut back on this, and they sent... And you felt that there was a pressure then to cut back, to make savings.
How much time?
20 seconds.
Ça donne rien. Merci beaucoup, madame. Je vais passer la parole. C'est pas une conversation.
Mr. McCauley, 7 minutes, please.
Thanks. And thanks for bearing with us while we had to run to vote. When you talk about savings, I used to be an EI appeals chairman for several years. When you talk about savings, are you talking about overpayments or fraud savings? Or tell me when you talked about, I think, $400,000 a year or $500,000 a year, what would that cover when you say savings? Because it's not from turning down people. It's from decisions and overpayments and that. Can you just fill me in exactly?
It is both. You're right. It is both. It is refusing claimants a claim. It is cutting of
Can I just
claims.
stop there? When you say refusing a claim, if a claim's denied because, sake of argument, in Edmonton it was 599 hours needed. If they worked 580 and they didn't qualify, that's not savings. So how are they trying to define savings when someone wouldn't have been eligible to apply under the EI Act? So I understand savings if they're going after people overpaid or who left the country, go down to the States, because there's always clawbacks. I'm just trying to figure out how they came up with this dollar value for savings, because it can't be for turning people down, because the savings would have been in the hundreds of millions then.
Well, it
not everyone
was
would
a
apply.
lot. It was a lot. If I remember well, the savings in the, I mean, I don't remember the numbers.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get to
Maybe-
what they determined as savings.
Yes, as well turning down people because, for example, if a claim that was allowed was like $4,000, that would be $4,000 given to that claimant. That was saving $4,000 because we didn't allow the claim, as
Sure.
well as
But you-
penalty.
Yeah, were you ever told to not follow the EI Act when turning down claimants?
I was not told clearly not to follow
Did
the
they
EI
hint? Did
Act.
they ever hint at anything like that, to not follow the Act?
I was hint into finding ways to. Yes, we were. We were hint into. But he didn't go to his appointment that he had for his
'Cause
work.
the reason I asked, the EI Act is very clear, and they set up very clear, it's like that, it's very clear boundaries, very clear rules. I'm trying to get at, and again, we're talking about whistleblowing, if people within the department told you to basically break the law or ignore the act as is required, and you're saying they did.
They did in the sense that they push you so much to intimidate with your questioning and with you can find fault easily with people, right? When you intimidate and you ask question and you can find fault. You can.
Were these quotas ever put in writing to you as
Oh, yeah.
part of a performance? Okay, so it would have applied for everyone then.
Yeah.
Okay, and when this was, I guess, presented to you, like, what were your thoughts about? What were your next steps like for whistleblowing? Did you consult with the union? What should I do? Did you look it up online? Oh, is this correct or not? Like, I'm just trying to. When you decided this is wrong, what was the next steps you took?
When I saw that this is wrong, it was more about some cases that we were talking, in everyday life, in the office, we were talking about, no, this person should be allowed. It was not the quotas and the 40,000 and everything.
I admit it's very disconcerting because, again, my time spent as a appeals chair is there's a lot of latitude given to the EI commissioners to approve or deny, which is why you have the appeals by both the government and also from the claimant. But you felt that was taken away, that they were pushing you the other way? Okay. Did the union ever explain why they didn't direct you to, say, the whistleblower path instead of filing a grievance?
No, I don't know. They said to me, this is the way to go, Sylvie. You have to go through the grievance process, and when it goes all the way to the end, then you'll be in, the labor.
Go to arbitration.
An arbitration.
Who internally did you talk to within the department?
I spoke with my team leader, with my manager at Harbor Center.
Did you and I'm just trying to get, did you express to them this is wrong, we need to fix this, or why are we doing this? I'm trying to figure out what they were telling you.
Yeah, I said, what they were telling me is, you're too sensitive to do that job. They say.
Did they direct you to other avenues of addressing this?
Oh no, they didn't give me any other avenues. They just say, oh, it's not a good job for you, or you're too sensitive to do that type of job. You're used to give money to people. Here we take money away from people, and that was my manager telling me that.
And did the harassment reprisal start immediately when you brought it forward? And did you? I'm just trying to get, did you say why are you doing this, or it just went full blown on you?
It went full blown. I mean, they changed me offices.
Like, I'm just wondering, quite often you see wonderful performance appraisals for staff, and all of a sudden there's an issue, and all of a sudden, it goes off the cliff immediately. Was that your case, where everything was perfectly fine or relatively fine until you brought it up?
Mm-hmm. Until I until I brought it up. And then they decided to send me to another office because I said I'm not comfortable in working with this environment anymore. So they sent me to another office, and it was even worse.
Did you feel that was just quick? Was that a demotion to move to another office or lateral?
No, it was lateral.
Okay, sorry,
But,
I just want to ask.
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Weir.
Thank you, Ms. Therrien, for appearing before our committee and also for your service as a whistleblower. One of my priorities since being elected has been to push for greater access and duration of EI benefits for laid-off workers in Regina. So I really value the work that you did in exposing the federal government's attempts to deprive people of those benefits. I appreciate the fact that you sat in on our meeting this morning, and of course I asked the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner about the relatively critical judgment of the Federal Court of Appeal against him in your case. You heard his answer to that question, and I just wonder if you or Mr. Yazbek have anything to add to it.
As I can see it, this man seems to avoid helping. Like he was saying at some point that, and I was talking with other people, he was saying at some point that he was neutral, that he was, and I thought his role was actually to protect whistleblower, not to be neutral. and I don't feel like he's doing that, and in the opposite. So, and he's trying to, he's trying to just leave me in that limbo now.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of that limbo, I mean, my understanding is that the Labor Relations Board has not yet ruled on whether it has jurisdiction to deal with your case, and the Integrity Commissioner is saying that because the Labor Relations Board is considering it, he can't touch it. And I wonder, I asked the Integrity Commissioner about that as well, and I wonder if you or Mr. Yazbek have, a different interpretation of how the system should be working. I mean, is Mr. Friday correct that he can't touch it as long as the Labor Relations Board is considering it, or is there more that the Commissioner could be doing under the existing law?
I would say that he's incorrect in saying he can't touch it. He certainly has the discretion to decide not to touch it. In the Court of Appeals judgment, in the reasons, they said that one of the things you might want to do as commissioner is consider waiting until the adjudication process ends so that you actually have a decision at the end, and then you can make a decision whether it deals with reprisal or not. But in this particular case, I can tell you that the evidence and the argument before the adjudicator did not rely on an allegation of reprisal at all. There's no dispute about that. And so, to me, the commissioner could have taken this up because his original decision was, well, the reprisal is being dealt with in the adjudication, so I don't have to deal with it now. But that's simply not the case. The reprisal is not being dealt with in the adjudication process. And so the commissioner could decide now to investigate Ms. Therrien's complaint.
So you think it's the discretion of the commissioner and not the act itself that's preventing him from taking up this case currently?
That's right.
Okay. Now, to just further pursue this theme of the different avenues that one might take in this type of case, you've got, the commissioner, you've got the Labor Relations Tribunal, you have, various internal processes in different departments and agencies. Mr. Ian, do you feel that you got any kind of useful information or guidance from the commissioner about what path to follow?
Not at all.
Were there other ways of getting that information? Were there other bodies that you could go to?
No, not at all.
Okay. And do you, or again, Mr. Yazbek, feel that that's one of the reforms we should be looking at, is to establish some kind of entity that can give people, guidance about, what route to take in these kind of cases?
Well, I think so, yes. And if you look at Ms. Therrien's circumstance particularly, she's wrapped up in this jurisdictional dispute, which frankly involves some fairly complicated legal arguments. And if one were there on their own, you would just be overwhelmed, and just obliterated by that. And that's the kind of system we have. This is a good illustration. You would have thought that by now, 4 years later, the reprisal allegation would have been addressed, good or bad, right or wrong, but no, we're still waiting.
Yeah, this seems to be a reoccurring theme among whistleblowers who've testified. On the other hand, the commissioner, I think, gave us some sense that his office might try to provide people with some information, but it sounds that, at least in your case, and I think some of the other cases we've heard about, that wasn't very adequate or very helpful. I also just want to ask you more broadly, as a whistleblower or as a lawyer representing whistleblowers, if you have some specific reforms that you'd like to propose to the committee, beyond the ones we've already touched on here.
I think that the idea of, this morning you talk about being whistleblower-centered, is a really good idea to really make sure that whistleblowers are protected and that they're that it's not so complicated a process. I have a good lawyer and it's fantastic, but why should it be like that? Why should it be such a? Part of it is because you're persecuted as soon as you do an allegation of wrongdoing, so you need a legal representation to defend you. But it shouldn't be so adversarial. They should have been investigating all the money they spend on trying to find who did the leak the document to the press and this and that. They could have investigated if there was quota and if that's true that the claimant didn't receive their money, the EI money that they were supposed to receive. They should maybe investigated if what I was alleging was true or not. That would have been a better place to put taxpayer money, I think.
And Mr. Yazbek, you have testified before, but I did want to just give you another opportunity if there were some particular reforms or proposals you want to put on the table for us to consider.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what I've said before to waste the committee's time, but something did come up earlier this evening when there were questions about the definition of wrongdoing, and I do think that definition is much too narrow. You talk about gross mismanagement. Well, it implies that mismanagement in the public service is okay. It's not wrongdoing, and that makes no sense to me.
Thank you very much. Mr. Whalen, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think based on the facts now, we can look and see that the EI process had become a boiler room, and that the financial incentives that were put in place to find bad claims actually created too much incentive and may have created wrongdoing. I don't necessarily think that would always be the case. Sometimes you need to have incentives put in place to motivate workers. It doesn't always necessarily mean that if you have incentives, there's going to be malfeasance. But I think that there was a reasonable apprehension here. And so rather than focus on the specifics of this case, Mr. Yazbek, when we're talking about disclosures, do we need to broaden the definition of to who and to where we disclose the information and lower the burden on the good faith burden so that it's just whether or not the documents on their face might show a reasonable person might believe that something's going wrong and it's worth looking into?
I would agree with that, and I think there's difficulty in relying on the good faith obligation, and I'm not suggesting that or condoning bad faith disclosures, but oftentimes people think of good faith as having a proper motivation, for example. And so if somebody's disclosing something because they want to get back at their supervisor, then that's going to be bad faith, and we don't want to deal with that disclosure. But it could very well be that the supervisor was engaged in wrongdoing as well. And so simply because there's some animus there on the behalf of the disclosure shouldn't disqualify that complaint. So I do think we have to be careful with that. And I also think historically there have been, in cases where people have gone public and they've been disciplined, the employer has often taken the position that, well, you can't disclose wrongdoing unless you know the allegations to be true. The sort of proof of truth requirement. And that's going way too far, because sometimes you don't know, you can't know. Sometimes you just have a suspicion. And sometimes you want somebody to investigate it just to make sure it is true or not. And frankly, that's the whole role of the commissioner. If somebody has a suspicion, that should be sufficient as long as it's reasonable and they're not acting in bad faith.
Okay. Mr. Yazbek, I saw one of the articles here about this particular case. It talked about 3% of claimants improperly applying for EI benefits. And it seems to be that this 3%, anywhere between 1% and 5%, seems to be almost a general rule in society for how likely somebody is to break a rule or a law. So it doesn't seem like the 3% in EI is out of the ordinary. Do you think that in your work in whistleblowing, what's the rate of, do you have any concept of what the rate of false allegations might be? Is it any reason to believe that it's higher or lower than other types of bad behavior?
I can't really answer that. I haven't. I mean, any of my clients, I've believed that they have been making legitimate disclosures, or attempting to at least. So I couldn't say. I would imagine it's not far off because we're dealing with, human nature.
Even if someone did make an allegation that turned out to be wrong, what is the negative impact on the alleged wrongdoer if they're ultimately shown to be vindicated in the investigation?
Well, I can see that there could be a personal impact. Investigations like that are stressful. There would be a period of time where they're suspected of something. If they were to retain their own counsel, there'd be a cost associated. So there could be implications there.
How often is it that someone needs to retain their own counsel? It seems universal that the departments retain counsel to protect the alleged wrongdoers.
I've seen it happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so in these allegations, if there's an investigative power on behalf of the department, should it be like a more natural justice process where the person who's alleged of the wrongdoing is afforded counsel, and the government institution that's investigating the wrongdoing has counsel, and then a separate adjudicative body? Is there a problem in our system where we have the investigator and the decision maker in one body? Is that a problem?
That can be a problem. Yes. I agree with that.
Okay. Further along the lines of how we can make this system better, if there, rather than focusing on reprisal, if we focused on a duty to protect and support whistleblowers and duty to protect and support those who make a disclosure of what they feel is a reasonably identifies some wrongdoing, would that have helped your clients? Do you think that having that opportunity to sue under the tort of failure to live up to a duty to protect and support would be easier than to try to sue to prove reprisal?
I don't think so. I think taking up that kind of litigation is going to be costly and can be difficult and is uncertain. I think a regime which allows a body like the commissioner or the equivalent of the commissioner to do investigations, an expert body would be better as long as it functioned properly and was efficient and objective, etc.
So you wouldn't see any real difference between having the standard of having to show that someone breached their duty to protect and support the employee, that wouldn't make any difference, versus having to have to prove that there was a reprisal? Because we've heard from evidence earlier this week that it's the lower standard was more protective of whistleblowers, the lower standard of someone failing to meet up their duty to protect and support versus having to prove reprisal, which is almost never done.
Mm. I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure what the standard would be in that other situation. Like, I'm not sure how a court would approach that. Certainly, it would be the civil burden of proof, right? Balance of probabilities, etc. And if you are proving reprisal, it's the same burden of proof. It's a balance of probabilities. But the problem with the reprisals is that you start with the proposition that the act in question is legitimate, and then you have to prove otherwise, and that puts a heavy burden on the complainant. Whereas in the case you're talking about, there's a standard out there that's applicable to the respondent or the defendant, and so in a way, it almost shifts the burden, so to speak, right? Because we're looking at whether they complied with that standard. So I guess when I think it through, I guess in that sense, it might be easier. I just think that the nature of reprisal as an insidious, difficult thing in the workplace is uniquely suited to an expert investigator, an expert decision maker, an expert tribunal to deal with, as opposed to a court dealing with a more general duty on behalf of somebody vis-a-vis a complainant or an employee. I think the need for expertise in this area is crucial. And I draw on the human rights jurisprudence for that, because we know that human rights commissions and tribunals have developed an expertise that enables them to identify discrimination and find it.
Well, Mr. Yazbek, I certainly think with only 7 cases under their belt, I'm not sure if our own tribunal has developed any material expertise.
Yeah, thank you
Sounds
very
like
much.
the Court of Appeal has seen just as much.
Colleagues, I just want to just do a quick consult with you. We finished our first round of 7-minute interventions. Are there further questions? And we can certainly continue. All right, then fine. We'll go to Mr. McCauley, then Mr. Ayub. Mr. McCauley, 5 minutes.
Just following up, when they transferred you, where did they transfer you to, like physically?
Burnaby. To another office
You were
in
in
Burnaby.
And where were you transferred to?
Oh, I was in Vancouver. They transferred
So
me
just
to Burnaby.
Oh, okay. Where were you living at the time? Because that's a bit of a hike.
Oh, I was living in Vancouver. It's not that far.
Oh, okay. Did they offer that? Because we've talked about, protecting whistleblowers by moving them to other positions. Did they offer that to you, or were they just said, here, go? Or was that part of a resolution that they offered you?
It was part of a solution, but it was not really a solution, because the reprisal continued, even worse.
Was part of this, was that brokered with help of your union, or was this just when offered to you when you started going up the level?
That's right.
Sorry,
Yeah,
which is
it
that?
was not with the union. no.
Okay, so it's just part of the process. Did anyone ever, when you started, came on board at any point in your career, informed you of any of your rights under the Whistleblower Act? Did it ever get mentioned? I know no one's going to mention the exact name of the act, but did it ever get mentioned anywhere along the lines with any of the bosses or any of the people you spoke to as you went up, or anyone in HR? No? Okay.
Not at all.
Okay. Was there anyone else involved? Because you mentioned a few people else were noticing, well, this was wrong, what they're doing. Did anyone else stick their neck out or speak out about it? Or had you heard of anyone else, the grapevine, who went through similar experiences that you had?
It was not talked openly because, of course, they didn't want to, to be put under the same grinder that I was in. But like I said, this guy and another person as well mentioned it, and they
Mentioned it to you or mentioned it to supervisors?
No, to me.
Okay. But you're not aware of anyone else mentioning to supervisor? Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Ayub?
Ça, c'est un...
It was a new job. It was in October, and I made the allegation in January. It was a new job then. Were there any other people that made this type of disclosure in the department? No, but I do remember meeting people in Service Canada and Quebec. They did undertake a campaign a fundraising campaign for me. And for a few minutes, we did occupy the offices, the Service Canada. I want to go quickly because I only have 5 minutes, so there was no one else then. Yes, there was someone said, Sylvie, you did a good job, but this person was working for Service Canada in the Lower St. Lawrence. But there was no consequences. No, she simply said it to me, and it wasn't heard by anyone else. Was it suggested that this was a matter of internal administration and not wrongdoing? Were you ever told that this is our internal administration, this is how we manage this particular department, it is not wrongdoing? Yes, I was told that, yes. Or you were not directed to your employer, to your superior, to give any explanation of what the proper procedure would be. And was there any probation period in your job? Probation period was already over. For the new job, for the new employment, I was a permanent employee of the Federal Public Service, but for this particular job, yes, a permanent employee. I'm not a judge, of course, and I'm not aware of the details of your file. But we are taking a look here at the possibility or feasibility of protecting whistleblowers and at the same time protecting employees and the employer. That is protecting everyone, as well as people who are being served, to ensure that whistleblowers are able to do what they have to do. Your particular case would appear to have had the effect of isolating you completely. You're in a kind of no man's land. You're not under the protection of any, of either the union. What type of assistance did you receive from the union? Mr. Yazbek. Thank you. That answers my questions.
Madame Therrien, Mr. Yazbek, thank you very much. Your testimony has been extremely helpful and illuminating. We've had some difficulties, frankly, as a committee, getting in touch or at least getting confirmation from whistleblowers to come and testify before a committee. We've heard from many bureaucrats. We've heard from many officials who are in charge of whistleblower protection in other jurisdictions, but very few whistleblowers. And there's a reason for that. In many cases, they're quite frankly fearful of reprisal, even by coming to our committee and testifying in camera. So I applaud your courage for appearing, and I thank you for your testimony, your candor, and all of the suggestions both of you have made is going to be extremely helpful for our committee as we move forward. Colleagues, we are adjourned, and our witnesses are excused. Thank you.